Hi guys, what's up? It's Speci here. The patch notes have basically leaked for the new Gwent patch, which is coming out on Thursday. These aren't going to be all of them because the only ones we can see are changes to armor, power, and provisions. If a card gets completely redesigned, you don't actually get to see it on the Play Gwent site. The way it works is on the Play Gwent deck site, they sort of change before they should. So we can see that, for instance, Coup de Grace is now showing up as 10 provisions on the Play Gwent website when we know it's 9, and that means that it's actually going to be 10 provisions in the next patch. So if there's a complete rework to the card, we aren't going to see those. So these aren't the complete and total patch notes. Also, there's some cards that might slip through because you actually have to do this manually. But I would imagine with the community as big as Gwent's at this point, all the changes that are power provisions or armor have been found. But for example, last season, Tunnel Drill got a complete redesign on its ability. We didn't know that that was going to get changed at all until the patch. The official patch notes were out. So do bear in mind there's probably a few missing here, and there could be some big changes that we aren't yet aware of. But without any further ado, let's crack on. Nilfgaard first. We've got Coup de Grace has moved from 10 provisions. Well, no, it's moved from 10 provisions. It used to be 9 provisions. Now, this is a change I'm a massive fan of. Listen, Coup de Grace got double buffed maybe like 6 months ago or so. It used to be 10 provisions and it used to do 2 power damage, but it got moved to 9 provisions and 3 power, and it's just so good that it's completely auto-include in Nilfgaard, and to not play Coup de Grace in a Nilfgaard deck kind of means you're playing a bad Nilfgaard deck. This card is still fantastically good at 10 provisions, and any time a card gets nerfed by a provision and it's still super competitive, you know that nerf was justified. So this is a great change. Definitely going to still see play, but it is going to be a bit of a pain because all your Nilfgaard decks are probably losing a provision now because most of your competitive Nilfgaard decks do play this card. You could argue, though, it's just a buff to other Nilfgaard archetype buff, but it's another reason to play decks like Hyperthin, which just haven't been seeing as much play this season. Cool. First one. Illusionist. Illusionist is now 4 power. It used to be 3. It's now 4 power. It's a great change. I do like the Illusionist. It's a really fun card, but it is a card that's very awkward at 4 provisions. I've talked a lot about it. You want to mulligan it in round 1 because you can't activate it. But that bonded ability, obviously, it's a big buff because you're going to play multiple Illusionists. You're going to play an Illusionist, possibly from Ramon as well as the Mushy Truffle. So I think you can play up to 4 Illusionists. But maybe there's ways of playing more. But generally speaking, you're going to be playing 3 or 4 Illusionists if you're playing them. So it's a big buff to the card. Great to see. Up next is Crossbowmen. It's now 4 power, so this card definitely deserved a buff. I've been playing some Soldier Nilfgaard recently, and this card wasn't an inclusion. There's actually a ton of 5 provision soldiers you want to play as well. So for this to be 4 power just means there's an extra one that you could consider playing. Definitely 1 point makes a difference to this because harder to remove. The armor, it does rely on quite a bit, but obviously if you're playing it in Imperial Formation, it's going to have a lot of armor as well now. This card is definitely looking a little bit more interesting as an option at 4 power. Finally in Nilfgaard, remember, at least based on power provisions, we've got the Alchemist. This is the card that swaps the power. You used to use it with T-Bor in mill decks. It doesn't see any play of any sort at the moment, and it is now 5 power, so it got a point. I don't think that's doing anything, to be completely honest. The other 3, though, big changes, particularly the coup change. It's great to see Illusionist buffed. I'm really happy to see this buffed as well, but this one, I don't really think it's doing much, but who knows? Maybe it could. If you guys got any deck ideas, again, it's usually used with T-Bor in mill decks with Unicorn, the Haracrux, and then you would switch the power of T-Bor with Living Armor, or sorry, switch the power of like a 1 strength card with Living Armor, and then you could also use Alchemist on T-Bor, and then use a what's that card called? An Ointment to heal it up. Pretty niche. Monsters is up next. We've got the Intrega Queen, 6 power. Yeah, consume an allied unit, gain its armor. Barricade at the start of your turn, damage up by 1, spawn a drone. Alright, that's a really cool change. This card's never really seen play, but it's another swarm payoff card. Consume an allied unit, so obviously you could also use it as a consume, like a higher value consume card. That's a big question. Is it just good enough to play as a consume card now? Probably not, but it's probably not that far off, right? It's kind of interesting. Like, imagine this on the Intrega eggs, for example. How good is this? This is definitely one to actually like talk about for a little while. We're not in a rush, really. A 6 for 6 consume, but also it's basically an 8 for 6 consume, which is already reasonable. It's an 8 for 6 consume with swarm payoff, but if what you eat has armor, it becomes more points. An 8 for 6 consume. I mean, It's definitely an interesting one. What Death Wish cards have armor though? In fact, what monster cards at all have armor? There's not really any I can think of. Thanks, Flexo. So you could eat a Kikimor Worker. You could eat Egan. I guess the Kikimor Worker is the biggest target for it, right? Because this also has like synergy of gaining more armor. Right? That's kind of interesting. It's honestly not too far off. And there's any obviously neutrals. You could do some Volodymyr stuff with it. I'm definitely gonna try this card out. Do I think it's super good? No, but I think in certain niche situations it could be pretty useful. Pretty cool. Could also, like, if you're playing Maruna, could set your Maruna up, right? There's more armored cards. Oh, really? Right. Ah, okay, so you're right. There's actually more. So Intregas do as well. There's not many of those though. AV6 consumer is definitely a buff. It is, but having said that, would you rather play an 8-for-6 consume, or would you rather play a 4-for-4 that can, you know, consume twice? I mean, this can be more than that, so it could be a 6-for-4 in theory, right? It's definitely nice though. I feel like the Swarm payoff is the more important part of it, but it's a really nice card. I'm really interested to see if this sees any competitive players. It's a really cool change. Nice little double buff. Old Spear Tip's 11 provisions. Honestly, Old Spear Tip with Sabbath is, you know, pretty nice. So, quite an interesting change. Don't see it making a huge difference, but Drowner is 4 provisions. Now, J. William James here reckons this is a big one. I tend to agree. So Drowner's going to be 4 provisions. I've always liked a bit of Drowner action. Now, one thing to know is, unlike Strays of Sparlet, it can't move your own cards. So, like, for example, in Kelly, it's not like you can use a Drowner on your Kaltalis. But before, it always seemed just a lot worse than Sparler for that exact reason. But now it's at 4p and it's Thrive. I mean, a good card to compare it to is the Dragoon in Scoia'tael, which is another 4 provision movement card. Dragoon, again, you can move your own stuff with. This, you can only move your opponent's, but it has Thrive. So what is this going to be useful in? Well, it's going to be useful in a lot of Thrive decks. It's just a cheap Thrive card. 2 on the Thrive curve is also pretty... it's kind of rare. You've got your Intrega Lavas at 2 now. But yeah, I think Frost is going to be the key one, right? A little bit of Frost. Also, if you're playing maybe like an organic deck with some Lacerates. Were-Rat as well, right? Just seems like a pretty decent card now. Kind of can't go wrong with it. I think it's a really good card. I love it. Like, it's not broken or anything. It's not like super powerful, but including 1 Drowner in your deck seems very decent, I would say, in a lot of situations. But it's not going to be like an auto include or anything even close to that. But really happy to see this card buffed. I've always liked the Drowner. Yeah, cool buff. Cool buff indeed. All right, we've got Detlef, who Zubidoo likes. Pepe Smile. He's 6 power. Big buff, because that's, what, 3 points to Detlef, basically? Yeah, because you summon this card twice, which means, you know, it's 15 points at the moment, but it's now going to be 18. So 3 points. 18 for 10 is pretty reasonable. But the other thing with Detlef as well is Caranthir is always been a really good Caranthir target. So, yeah, there's also extra points to the Caranthir play. A big question you always have to ask with Overwhelming Hunger is, like, how many consumes can you really have? Because the leader, as far as you know, has still just got 2 leader charges, right? There's no evidence to suggest it's going to change to 3 anytime soon. So there's still that side of things. But yeah, there's quite a few Overwhelming Hunger buffs here, so definitely want to test out on patch day. We've also got Goliath. It's now 7 provisions, so your Monster Mill decks have just been buffed. Again, you can use this with Sabbath. I don't think Goliath's going to be doing too much elsewhere, though. Ozrel's 8 provisions. Massive change. Honestly, like, from what I've heard, like, there's a few people that are a little bit, like, unsure this was necessary. But Ozrel just hasn't been seeing really any play recently, so... Oh, Goliath Penitent. That's a really big pickup, yeah. I should slow down. Yeah, that's a good point. Penitent Goliath's kind of interesting. Yeah, so Goliath Penitent. Definitely an interesting idea. You can go Penitent. You've got Pugo. You've got Beast and Phantom in there, as well as... What's that other card called? What's that other card called? The Consumer. Idea, whatever it's called. So yeah, definitely another addition. You've also got Ratcatcher S2. Interesting. Yeah, then Ozrel getting 8 provisions is huge. Hasn't been seeing any play recently. Obviously, Old Spear Tip also got a provision as well, if you wanted to include that package. E-Gun as well is looking kind of nice with the Intrega Queen, although you're going to go super tall with the E-Gun. But it's pretty cool that you could do that. Definitely think this is a big change. And finally, Maruna for monsters is 6 power. A buff to Maruna. And again, I'm really happy to do this. I played a lot of Overwhelming Hunger myself recently, and it was an uphill battle. You've got the Harpies with Mushy Truffle, which is really cool. But they definitely needed something more. So a point on Maruna. It's not huge, but it's something. And 3 points on Detlef mean that Detlef is definitely a much more reasonable consideration. I feel like he's going to be good enough. It's going to be close. I think it should be good enough, though. Maruna's a super random change. Well, I think it's just evidence that they would just want to give Overwhelming Hunger a bit of support, right, with this as well. I think it makes sense. I'm not sure. Like, Maruna's one of the better Deathwish cards, though, right? But... Alright, NR. The North Temeria. That's what matters. Visigoth is 6 power and has 2 armor. That's pretty cool. I've been using him, as you might know, in my Queen Meve Inspired Zeal decks, because you just give him a leader charge and he's good to go, and you don't have to leave him floating on the board. But this is a big buff for him if you don't want to use a leader charge potentially in that sort of a deck. You're more inclined to just be able to leave him floating on the board because he's no longer dying to an Owl's Thunder. You're going to need a Becker's Rock Slide or a Lock to kill him. So yeah, it's a nice change. I don't think I want to see Visigoth getting formation back like many others do. I'm personally quite glad that he's not just this auto-include card that can just rain down destruction, but I'm happy to see him buffed. Thala is now 7 points and 7 provisions. He was previously 6 and 8, so that's actually a buff to Monster Mill. Northern Realms Mill. It's the only deck I think I've seen Thala be used in is a little bit of Monster Mill. Northern Realms Mill, because you use Thala in combination with Stregobor. So I still think this card is completely terrible. I think it's one of the worst cards in the game, actually, even with this buff. But maybe I'm wrong. Like, what this card does is it extends the round. You can gain card advantage comboing it with Stregobor, much like you do with Matter and Stregobor, right? Is it Matter and Stregobor? It is, right? But this is actually slightly better because you can tutor the Thala, and you can also choose to play it front row or back row. That's formation. Siege Master is now 3 points and 4 provisions. This card's 3 power, 4 provisions. It's a soldier, guys, so you can use this with mobilization. This is a mobilization card? How good is this in mobilization? Boost an ally by 2, resupply boost adjacent siege engines by 1. So you can get an instant crew pocket. This with Moby. You play it as a 3, and then your leaders are 3. It's not great, is it? It's pretty pants. I'll build a deck with it, though. It sounds like fun. I mean, you don't want to use your leader charges on 4 provision cards, so let's be honest. But it's something. It's interesting. Redanian Knight is now 2 power, so it got a point. It's actually good to see, because this card's probably quite underrated, and it's very much looking quite hot, actually. It's this one. Oh, no. God. I thought it was the Elite. Oh god, this card's still terrible. Right? Starts as a 3, basically. I mean, this honestly it's a lot better. Northern Realms historically has always had some of the worst 4 provision engines. The big problem is these days they just have the flipping mages, right? Like, why would you ever play this card when mages exist? basically, is where we're at. The 4 provision ones, right? The Bernard student and the Aretusa student. Because they're also 1 point per turn that start at 4 points. This starts at 3 points. They start at 4. Is the starter deck card? Okay, so it's a buff to starter deck. Nice. Good observation. Windhelm also got a point. So he's going to be starting at 4. Mate, Windhelm was one of my favourite cards back in the day when he was first released. I've barely ever used him since. But he's looking a lot better. Starting at 6. It's honestly no joke. It's really not bad. He's looking pretty good. 1 point's quite a big deal, I think, on Windhelm. He's been like slowly but surely just getting buffs here and there. Do I think he's going to be like auto-include? Absolutely not. But I feel like he's he's definitely much more justifiable. Okay, and then these are the 2 biggest ones. We'll talk about Vernon Roach. Vernon Roach is now 10 provisions. Vernon Roach has just been waiting to be good for the longest time. If you guys weren't around in beta, this ability used to belong to Dijkstra. And it was like an auto-include card in Northern Realms. But the game has changed a lot. Because previously you used to be able to pretty much thin your deck reliably all the time. And you just played bronze cards, silver cards, gold cards. Whereas now you have the provision system. So you've got a bunch often of 4 provision cards and then some high-end cards. So a lot of time you're going to use your Vernon Roach and you're just going to hit your 2 4 provision cards, right? That you would otherwise just keep in your deck. Which is why he's always kind of sucked. But he's been getting so many buffs. Maybe it's time. The other thing about Vernon Roach is being able to replay him can be pretty interesting. So you can use him with the Handgave Sword here. But you still, unfortunately, cannot use this card with him, which was my favourite combo for a long time. You used to be able to use Han Marvin's Blue Dream on him, but they then put this thing of 9 provisions. As soon as Vernon Roach is 9 provisions and I can use Han Marvin's Blue Dream on him, I'd be interested. In fact, I would love to see Han Marvin's Blue Dream hit 10. Like, Renew is just significantly better than this card, right? This card deserves a buff, right? Would you guys agree that this card could be 10 and then you could actually use Vernon Roach with it? And then we're talking about Vernon Roach being a cool card. What were silver cards doing? Good question. They were like tech cards a lot of the time, so there weren't defenders or purifiers back then, but it was those types of cards like weather clears, cards. There was like silver mages, which had like the ability to either play like a thunder, a weather clear, or a weather themselves. There was silver spies, which each faction had 1 of, which would give you card advantage. Thala, Cantarella were 2 of those. They were like minus 13 points, but you draw a card. Isn't this just New Vilgefortz? Kind of, but you play it instead of putting it in your hand rope. It's quite similar. But yeah, I'd love to see this card buff. This is always one of my favourite cards back in the day with Vernon Roach. Now that Vernon Roach is 10, if we see Han Marvin's go to 10, I'd be all over it. Alright, and then probably the biggest change from me, this expansion this patch that I was hoping for, is some sort of nerf to Meditating Mages. It's not the most competitive deck, the all-in deck that is in the game. It's just a deck that I completely and utterly despise. Now, we also, bear in mind, don't know if there's been any other changes to them because we only see power and provision changes. So for all we know, Meditating Mages might have been deleted. Judging by this, it's quite likely that they're the same, with Aretusa Adepts going to 5 provisions and the Meditating Mages going to 3 power. Now, obviously, the all-in deck plays so many Meditating Mages that it has lost a lot of points. It's lost 2 provisions. Now, for me personally, the 2 provisions means virtually nothing. In fact, it's lost 3 provisions as well because Mushy Truffle's also got a nerf, which we'll get onto in just a minute. So it's lost 3 provisions in the Adepts and the Mushy Truffle. But it's currently a deck that plays Pincer Maneuver and it plays cards like a Neuromancy. So the provisions are really pretty irrelevant because there's so many provisions available in that deck that you can get away with still playing a Neuromancy despite playing Pincer, right? So I think the provisions are, while they're not irrelevant, they're negligent. Negligent is not fair, but a lot of time, if a deck loses 3 provisions, that's a huge deal. But I really don't think it's anywhere near as much of a big deal with this particular deck because of how many consistency cards they could still get away with playing, because all you really care about is these cards that play more Meditating Mages, right? Like, you want to play all those cards and therefore you don't really have a top end. But obviously they've lost multiple points. So let's say in round 1, if you play 7 Meditating Mages, you're losing 7 points, right? And that's obviously going to be carryover as well. Is that a big deal? Yes. But personally for me, no surprises here. I'm probably the biggest meditating, like at least publicly. I'm sure there's other people. But publicly, you know, it's no secret that I don't like Meditating Mages. Actually, I really like the card. I just don't like the all-in deck, right? That's my biggest problem. The interaction it has with Tisea. I'm actually all for cheap resilience. I think it's really interesting in NR, especially where you've got cards like Draug. I think it's really interesting with Mushy Truffle and Nadali and Reinforcements. I'm a big fan. I really am. I think Bonded Resilience, the card is fun to play. It's cool. My problem is the interaction it has with the Aretuza Adepts and Tisea. Being able to carry over... have resilience into all 3 rounds is really where my big issue comes with this card, because it just really goes against the feeling of the game. And I can only imagine the experience for new players up against Meditating Mages is not one that's very fun. So my problem with it really is the fact that you can use Tisea to reapply the order. What that does is it means they can carry over their orders to round 2, which means you can either then click them again, right, and then have carryover for 3 rounds, or what you can do is you can have their order enabled, and then you can play your Aretuza Adepts, which you can tick for like 7, 8, 9 points per turn each. And then you could just never even click the Aretuza Adepts, sacrifice your round 3 carryover to continue having your Aretuza Adepts ticking for 7, 8, 9 points per turn. And then you can just 2-0 your opponent with very little interaction taking place. So personally, I'm quite disappointed with this change. In fact, I'm very disappointed with this change. I really hate the card. However, I did see a lot less of this all-in deck on ladder in the more recent weeks, and hopefully it's going to be enough to continue doing that. Personally, I'm quite surprised there was no all-in Meditating Mage decks at the Gwent Open that was recently taking place, but NR was one of the best performing factions, and while I was away this weekend, so I'm not super in the loop. If I'm not mistaken, the winning lineup was playing Meditating Mages. It just wasn't all in. It was still in Inspired Zeal, because Vengeance is so strong in Inspired Zeal, and it definitely makes sense to use that lead ability. So listen, I really think the card's cool, but for me, the Tisea interaction in particular is a big no-no. Big no-no. If you guys would like another video talking about Meditating Mages once we've seen these changes in action, let me know, because I think it's a really interesting topic of discussion that I definitely like to talk more about. To be honest with you, a lot of the NR cards, I don't really like the mages. I really don't like the bronzes, the 4P. We actually touched on it earlier. Why would you play ever a card like the Redanian Knight when the Patience cards exist at 4 provisions? I don't like Letitia, because if you don't answer her, you just get so much carryover. I don't like the Alumni, because they're just so all in on, if your Patience engines stick in round 1, you're so strong later on, and if they don't, you're much weaker. I don't really like that either. I don't like Tisea, because there's just lots of dodgy interactions with her, particularly this Meditating Mage one. I actually think that as a standalone card, the Meditating Mage is probably my favourite Northern Realms card that we've had this expansion. I just hate the interactions it has with the Adepts, which is really enabled by Tisea, to be completely fair. Alright, we've got Syndicate up next. Mutated Hound, 5 power. Not sure on the armor, but it's 5 power. So that's a nice change. Mutated Hound is the 5 provision poison card. Often the Fistech Trafficker and the Fistech overshadow it because they're cheaper. So the Hound getting a little bit of love is really cool. If you're going to play Portal, for example, which you can do in Syndicate, this is a nice addition, a nice point addition. Definitely more of a consideration. Also got Bincy at 9 provisions, which is great to see. Bincy's a really good card, but just a little bit expensive, so that's a great change. The biggest one, though, the Cut Up Lackey, mate. 4 provisions, love that. The Mushy Truffle Cut Up Lackey deck is going to be making a return next season then. Kalkstein, 6 provisions. This is a change I'm really happy to see as well. Kurt has just completely overshadowed Kalkstein ever since Kurt was made into a Purify and Bounty card. So Kalkstein being more competitive, being a more competitive option is great. This is a great answer to the meditating mage decks potentially. So maybe Calcstein on meditating mages is something we can try and achieve next season. And the Witch Hunter Executioner is now 4 power. This is another great change. In a lot of my bounty decks that I've been playing recently, I just sacked this card off completely. But at 4 power, it's much more reasonable, more difficult to kill. It's not dying to things like Dip in the Pontar. It's not going to die to things like Circle of Life. And it's obviously just a little bit more tempo as well. Not a bunch of changes for Syndicate. Probably the most important one is this Bincy one and the Executioner change. And Calcstein as well. Honestly, I like every one of these changes without doubt. Really nice changes for Syndicate. But we all know since Drill got nerfed, Syndicate has been struggling. I wouldn't be that surprised if there's a deck somewhere for Syndicate. Skellige. 3 huge changes. Primal Savagery is now 4 provisions. Guys, this change is huge, is it not? Is this not just a banger of a change? Is this not like a pretty huge change? This is an 8 for 4. This is like a forbidden magic that doesn't spawn an engine, but it's just a point slam card. I feel like this change is pretty significant. It's pretty easy to set up in SK as well with things like hunters, etc. Right? I feel like this is a pretty big deal. I mean, 8 for 4 is very good. Like, let's be very clear. Like, an 8 for 4 is very well statted, particularly because this is an 8 for 4 that has removal potential. Right? Wild Boar of the Sea is 4 power. Great change. Fukusha's 4 power from 5. To be completely honest, this card should definitely have got nerfed more, right? But whatever. At least it's a change. I imagine it's going to get nerfed again next month. Card's just way too good. I heard it play for like 25 points in one of the games at Masters. Pretty ridiculous. Scoia'tael. We have Vara Brigade is 4 powers as the movement boy. Damage enemy unit by 2 whenever moved. Damage a random enemy unit by 2. I feel like this card's never seen play, right? Like, how can you actually move it? You can move it with Malena. You can move it with Leader. You could move it with the location. But yeah, I could see it maybe as a one-off. I actually can't see it. Do you know why I can't? I feel like this is a perfect example of a card that should have just been made for provisions. Elven War Dancer is 4 power. I've seen a few people play Elven War Dancer actually already this season. It's a 6 right now, right? It's gonna be a 7. That's a nice buff. Big change. I like it. Big buff to Invigorate. So this is a really significant buff because this card is just in your deck now ×2. It's actually a huge buff. Like 1 point at 4 provisions is absolutely huge. Massive. So massive buff here. Really like it. This card getting buffed as well. I'm so happy. This is one of the biggest cards I've been calling for to get buffed. It's one of the only price of power cards that's seen like 0 play. It was completely unplayable at 9 provisions. It's been made 7 provisions. So has it been changed in any way? As far as we know, it's just no. So again, we don't know on abilities, right? How many points is it for 7? Boost land unit by 6. It's like 9 for 7 to carry over. It's a big change. You can't tutor it very well apart from Fire and Neuromancy though. But this is definitely a big buff. And the Talk buff. Talk got a point, which I mean it's a point, but yeah. Someone suggested, actually, I think in the comments here, that they prefer this to be given a spot in your hand that it starts in every time, like just always start at the left card, which I think would be cool, like Sunset Wanderers, because then you can just instantly get the buffs on it with the Bountiful Harvest. That's an interesting idea. And then Mush Truffle got nerfed. Thank God, this card was very OP, but it's still good. 10 provisions, it's still very good. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. There will be official patch notes probably tomorrow, I think. So any other changes, we'll talk about those there. But for the moment, these were the leaked patch notes. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you watched this far, make sure you comment and let me know. The secret word today is sausages. Nice one.